You are born in a place that smells of wood smoke, wet earth, and rotting straw. The village clings to the side of a sluggish river, its banks frozen in winter and swampy in summer. The air is sharp with cold for half the year, and in those months you can see your breath while you sleep, curling out like pale ghosts in the darkness. The walls of your family's hut are made from wattle and daub, sticks, mud, and the desperate hope that this year the winter wind will not peel it apart. Inside, everything is dim, cramped, and filled with the sounds of coughing. You are the son of a peasant who spends his life bent over the soil, coaxing thin crops from land that has been scraped bare for generations. Your mother rises before dawn to feed the fire and boil whatever can be boiled: cabbage, gruel, the occasional scrap of pork fat that still smells faintly of the animal. You grow up knowing the feel of rough wooden handles in your hands, of calluses forming before you are old enough to understand the word for them. You learn quickly that in your village, music is not a thing people do for pleasure. It is a thing that occasionally passes through, like a traveling merchant, a rare, brief intrusion before the mud, hunger, and sickness close back in. The first time you hear a harp, you are 8 years old. It is not golden, nor strung with fine silk, as the stories sometimes say. It is battered, its frame darkened by years of smoke, one leg repaired with a piece of mismatched wood. The man who plays it is a traveling musician who sleeps in the hayloft of the inn in exchange for his music. His hands are long but rough, the nails cracked, the fingertips hard from years of pressing strings. His cloak smells of damp wool, and there is a greasy shine to his hair. But when his fingers pluck the strings, the sound is something you have never heard before, thin and wavering, yet alive, curling into the cold night air like a small miracle. You do not yet understand the discipline it takes to make such a sound. You only know that it is different from the groaning of oxen, or the creak of cartwheels, or the shouting of men in the fields. You think, briefly, that perhaps you could make such a sound. Your father sees your face in that moment and scowls. Music will not put bread in your mouth, he says. And he is right, but you do not care. Years pass, and you do the work you are told. You swing scythes in summer heat that makes the air shimmer. You break ice on the river to fill buckets in winter, your hands raw and red, your nails black with grime. But when no one is watching, you hum the scraps of melody you remember. You find yourself tapping rhythms on the handles of tools. When you are 16, you discover an old harp, smaller than the one you first saw, with several missing strings, in the possession of the village moneylender. It leans against the wall behind him, half forgotten. He tells you it can be yours for the price of a month's wages. It might as well be the cost of a house. Still, you work. You save. You eat less. Wrap yourself tighter in the same patched cloak each winter, and take the harp at last. It is heavier than you expect, the wood solid under your hands, the smell of dust rising as you touch it. The strings are stiff, some frayed, but when you pluck one, the sound, faint, imperfect, is enough to make your chest tighten. You learn by trial and error. No one teaches you. Your fingers ache after a few minutes, and the sound you make is closer to the buzzing of a trapped fly than to the music you imagined. But you persist. In a world where every day is the same, digging, carrying, cutting, mending, the harp gives you a reason to stay awake after dark. By the light of a guttering tallow candle, you fumble through scales you invent for yourself. The village has little patience for you. Some say you are wasting time. Others say you are vain. One man tells you that the devil teaches idle hands to play, and that no good will come of it. Yet a few children linger near your hut in the evenings, listening to the hesitant notes. You ignore the mockery. You cling to the sound. Winter comes again. The river freezes solid. The sky turns the color of lead, and the wind drives snow into every crack in the walls. Your father is ill, coughing up blood into rags that must be washed in icy water. You work twice as hard to keep the family fed, yet each night you still take out the harp. You press your sore fingertips to the strings, feeling the sting. Somewhere in your mind, you imagine a life where music is not something hidden, but something that fills halls with light and warmth. You cannot yet know that such halls are as cold and damp as your hut, only bigger, and that music there is less miracle than labor. For now you believe that playing the harp could be an escape. In truth, it will only lead you into new forms of servitude. But you are young, and in the slow, grinding days of the village, youth is enough to make you dream. You leave the village at dawn with your harp wrapped in a coarse blanket and tied with twine that smells of old hemp. The mud of the road grips your boots as though trying to pull you back. A thin mist hangs over the ditches where frogs croak with a sound like wet leather. You pass hedgerows tangled with thorns, fields of stubble where rooks complain, and cottages that lean as if ashamed to be seen in daylight. You do not count the miles. You simply walk until your legs throb and the skin on your heels peels away like bark. You speak to no one. You are a boy with a wooden burden and a stubborn idea that refuses to die. The city does not appear so much as gather around you. First, a scatter of houses with smoke fingering the sky. Then, a broken ring of ditch and palisade. Then, taller walls with scabbed towers like rotten teeth. The gate is flanked by guards who smell of onions and wet wool. They glance at your harp bundle and wave you through because there is no profit in stopping someone who clearly owns nothing worth taking. Inside, the streets are not streets, but braided streams of filth. There is a stew of ash, dung, and horse urine that has congealed into a permanent surface. Shops huddle beneath jutting upper floors, their signboards creaking on chains. A tankard, a boot, a knife, a loaf. You feed yourself on crusts and thin ale that tastes of sour tin. You ask questions no one wants to answer. Where does a musician go to learn? Whom does a harpist serve? Most shrug. A few laugh. At last, a cellarer at a monastery kitchen points you to a house near the market where a former court musician has retired into poverty. You find a door warped by rain and a knocker shaped like a lion with one ear broken away. The old harpist answers after several knocks and a cough. He is small and stooped, his knuckles like stones, his eyes bright and watery. He regards you the way a cat regards a stranger's hand. You speak your wish and show your instrument. He lets you in with a sound that is almost a groan. His room is a museum of failures. A stool with one leg splinted by cord, a brazier gone cold because fuel costs coin, a harp frame snapped at the neck and bound with rawhide, scraps of gut string curled like shed snakes. On the wall, a fading scrap of embroidered cloth that once belonged to a noble household. The old man touches it with two fingers as one might touch a relic, not out of reverence, but out of habit. He cannot kill. He tests your hands before he tests your music. Stretch your fingers, he orders. Close them, open again, press the tips against the tabletop. He hums without praise and without complaint. When you finally play, he does not pretend to enjoy it. He listens for what is not yet there and for what might someday be. After a time that could be a handful of heartbeats or a long afternoon, he nods once. You may stay, he says, if you can carry water, chop wood, clean, and keep your mouth shut. You agree because there is nothing else to say. Your apprenticeship begins with silence. The old man does not teach with speeches. He teaches by making you repeat what he shows until your fingers no longer belong to you. You sit at dawn with the harp tilted against your chest, feeling the wood press its slow heartbeat into your ribs. You pluck scales that taste of dust. Your fingertips harden to small shields of pain. It is not inspiration. It is not even hope. It is simply the same exercise again and again until your hand moves before your mind has time to interfere. In the afternoons, you become a repairer of things that were never well made. The lesson is not noble. Glue made from boiled hooves must be warmed to the right stickiness. A split soundboard can be cleated with a sliver of spruce shaved thin as a fingernail. A peg that will not hold must be roughened with chalk, then smoothed with tallow so it will turn but not slip. You learn the moods of wood. It swells when the weather is wet and shrinks to a sulking hardness when the air turns dry. You learn that gut strings are not spun out of romance. They are made from entrails, scraped, soaked, twisted, and dried until they can remember a pitch. Every string is a small animal that needs coaxing. Every knot is a promise that might break at the least convenient moment. The city is cold even when the sun is out. The stone remembers the last frost and will not let it go. You practice in a narrow room with walls deadened by old tapestries, their colors gone to the brown of old bread. Rats conduct a nightly parliament in the rafters. Sometimes you hear a choir from the church across the square, distant and pure, like a sheet hung high and white above a midden. The old man says nothing about that music. He only moves your wrist with two fingers, showing you how you are wrong without telling you why. Now and then he tells you stories that are not stories. He says a lord will pay a mason for a wall and respect the wall because it stands. A lord will pay a cook for a meal and respect the cook because he can count the bones. A lord will pay a musician because it is fashionable to pay, and then he will forget the musician before the echoes die. He says, the string does not care for your feelings. He says, you are not an artist. You are a servant who carries sound the way a porter carries sacks. The sooner you accept this, the less you will suffer. He says these things in the same tone one uses to remark upon the weather. You learn the economy of humiliation. When a servant from a grand house comes to summon your master to play, he arrives with a look that says he would rather be anywhere else. He tells you to clean the shoes before you enter, then tells you they are still not clean enough. At the house, you are kept waiting in a corridor where wet cloaks drip onto your sleeves. A steward with a chest like a cupboard looks you up and down and reminds you not to speak unless spoken to. In the hall, you must play while men slurp and belch and argue over rents and hunting rights. When you miss a note, your stomach clenches even before anyone notices. The old man does not scold afterwards. That is almost worse. He says quietly again. On market days, you walk the stalls to haggle for string. The price is always too high. The moneylenders know that musicians cannot eat their instruments, and so they sell you the means to work at a cost that will keep you hungry. You buy anyway, and wrap the coils in linen and tuck them beneath your shirt to keep them from damp. At night, you boil the newest string to soften it, then stretch it slowly as one might draw a stubborn truth from a reluctant witness. When it snaps, you do not swear. You tie another knot and begin again. Your body records the apprenticeship even more faithfully than your memory does. The thumb of your right hand grows a ridge where it meets the first finger. Your shoulders pinch inward from hours of leaning. Your left forearm bruises where the edge of the harp digs in. Your back develops a chronic ache that becomes part of you, like the urge to breathe. Sometimes your eyes blur and the lines of the strings double. You do not stop. Stopping would mean noticing that your lungs hurt from the city's smoke and your stomach contracts on days when the bread is thin. You begin to understand the secret arithmetic of sound. A string shortened to half its length gives a pitch that is sharper by a clean interval you can feel in your teeth. A string twice as thick answers with a lower voice and sulks if tuned too high. You learn to hear when two notes breed a wolf, that rough beating that makes listeners frown and not know why. You file the bridge, nudge the angle, adjust the tension until the wolf slinks away. None of this will be applauded. If you do it perfectly, no one will notice except you. There are moments when the work tricks you into calling it joy. Between the crow calls and the clatter of peddlers, a pattern you have practiced for weeks suddenly falls into place as a flock might wheel and settle in a field. Your hands move without fear. The notes lie flush against each other, making a surface as smooth as planed wood. In that instant, the room seems warmer, and you almost believe that music is a refuge. Then a cart rattles in the lane, or a neighbor coughs blood in the stairwell, and the spell breaks, reminding you what world you live in. The old man grows stiffer as winter returns. He rubs his fingers with oil and swears at them as if they were disobedient servants. He shows you more and multiple, not because you are gifted, but because necessity does not ask permission. He begins to send you alone to lesser houses, where small men with new money want the trappings of culture. You play while they drink and recount lawsuits. A merchant commands you to repeat a tune again and again because his child clapped once, and he mistakes that for taste. When you are paid, it is in coins that smell of sweat, and not always the full amount promised. You learn to bow and to leave before they remember to cheat you further. On a night when the fog is thick enough to become a room of its own, the old man tells you that your time as apprentice is ending, not because you are ready. No one is ready, because there is work, and someone must do it. He sits by the brazier with a blanket over his knees and says, "Tomorrow you will go to the castle, where the steward requires another pair of hands." He says the word requires the way one might say devours. He warns you to listen more than you speak, to smile less than you want, and to value the good opinion of the scullery maids, for they can ruin you before any lord has learned your name. You lie awake with the harp against your shoulder, listening to the strings hum with the faint noise of the city. You think of the village river frozen under moonlight, of the old moneylender's shop, of the first thin note you ever drew. You tell yourself that the court will be better, because hope is a habit you have not yet unlearned. In the morning, you will carry your instrument up a hill of stone to rooms that smell of damp tapestry, where your music will be judged as a service, like polishing a helm or sharpening a knife. You will bow, you will tune, you will play. You will become what the old man said you are, a porter of sound. And you will learn that in this world, even miracles report to the steward. The castle is not the glittering jewel you imagined as a boy. It is a fortress of stone that sweats in the cold, its walls stained with centuries of damp and smoke. The air inside smells of wet wool, stale rushes, and the faint sourness of old wine spilled into cracks in the floor. You enter through a side gate because musicians, like scullions and stable boys, do not walk through the grand arch. The steward meets you in a corridor where torchlight catches the greasy streaks on the walls. He is a man of few expressions, all of them mildly displeased. He takes in your harp, your patched tunic, and your muddy boots, and tells you where you are to stand when not playing, behind the high table, but far enough away that you will not be heard breathing. Your quarters are not in the towers or the keep, but in a long, low annex that smells of horses in summer and smoke in winter. You share the space with a pair of lutenists and a boy who beats the drum during hunting processions. The rushes on the floor are changed only when they rot through, and the fleas in them bite without preference. You keep your harp on a small stand beside your straw mattress, wrapped in linen against the cold. You do not sleep deeply. You know the value of the wood is greater than the value of your own body in the eyes of the steward. Your first day at court is not a performance, but a lesson in invisibility. You follow a master musician, not your old teacher, but a man dressed in velvet that is faded at the elbows. He knows the rhythms of the household when the Lord prefers to hear music, and when he will fling in a goblet if disturbed, when the lady of the castle wants soft airs in her solar, and when she will ignore you entirely in favor of gossip with her ladies in waiting. The master instructs you without turning his head, as if the words were for himself. Never play louder than the Lord's voice. Never pause when guests laugh, for they will think you mock them. Always look as if you are listening to their stories, but never respond, even if asked a question. The great hall is both grand and filthy. The banners hang high, their colors dulled by years of smoke from the hearth. The stone flags underfoot are worn to a shallow curve from centuries of boots. Dogs roam freely, snapping at scraps that fall from the trestle tables. When you play here, you must stand at an angle to the fire so that the heat will not warp your harp, yet close enough that your fingers will not stiffen. You learn quickly that no one listens to you the way you imagined as a boy. Your music is a background to their business, a low hum behind the clatter of trenchers, the slosh of wine, the bellow of arguments over land boundaries. At feasts, the work is endless. You begin before dawn, tuning and retuning to fight the damp that creeps into the strings overnight. You play while the hall fills, while the meats are carried in, while the ale is poured. The sound must not falter, even when the knife crashes through bone or the dogs bark for offal. By the time the roasted boar is brought in, apples in its mouth, skin lacquered with fat, your arms ache and your fingertips feel raw under their calluses. You dare not shift your stance for fear of drawing the steward's attention. Once, a drunken knight leans too close, his breath heavy with onions and mead, and demands a tune you do not know. When you hesitate, he calls you slow-witted and makes the hall laugh. You learn to invent a melody quickly, to mask the gaps in your knowledge with flourishes that sound intentional. Another time, the Lord Himself waves for silence so you may play alone for a visiting baron. Your heart hammers, your fingers tremble, but the baron's eyes slide past you before the first verse ends, already seeking the next goblet of wine. You begin to understand that in this place, music is not an art to be savored. It is an ornament, like the embroidery on the lady's gown or the carved beasts on the armrests, something meant to be admired only in passing, never considered deeply. The work is constant, but the praise is scarce. Payment comes not in coins for you, but in the right to stay another night in your flea-ridden quarters, to eat crusts from the kitchen after the lords are done. The other musicians are not friends so much as fellow survivors. The lutenists share gossip about who in the castle is falling out of favor, who has been caught stealing from the buttery, who is rumored to be sent away. The drummer boy sleeps with his instrument beside him, fearing theft from the servants. You all share the same small luxuries, a better piece of bread from the cook when she is in a good mood, a corner by the hearth in the laundry where the air is almost warm. Sometimes you are sent to play in the ladies' solar. The room is smaller and cleaner than the hall, though the air still carries the scent of damp cloth. Here, the ladies sew by the light of narrow windows, their needles flashing in the pale sun. They ask for gentle airs, nothing that will disturb the rhythm of their stitching. You play, watching the tiny flecks of dust turn in the light. When the lady's small dog barks, your music must stop at once, for the animal's comfort outweighs yours. There are moments when you catch yourself staring at the carved ceiling beams, wondering how many players before you have stood in this same spot, their backs aching, their minds wandering. You think of the old man in the city, his words about being a porter of sound. You carry it well now, but you know the weight will grow heavier with each year until your hands betray you. You notice things at court you never saw in the village, the rot in the beams above the hearth, hidden behind fresh rushes, the way the kitchen girls hide burned bread in their aprons to feed the children who wait by the postern gate. The fact that the Lord's armor is polished more often than his floors are cleaned. You realize the castle is not so different from the village. It is still a place where the powerful eat first, where labor is endless, where warmth is a privilege granted sparingly. And yet, you play, because here, at least, you are not bending over a plow until your spine groans. Here, your hands are calloused, not from the handle of a spade, but from strings that hum under your touch. Here, you have an audience, even if they are too busy to truly hear you. You learn to accept that this is what passes for better in the life of a medieval harpist, a dry corner to sleep in, the chance to keep your fingers moving, and the knowledge that for tonight you will not be turned out into the mud. You tell yourself it is enough, not because you believe it, but because in this world, believing otherwise is a luxury you cannot afford. You leave the castle with the kind of permission that is not permission at all, only an instruction delivered by the steward as he studied a tally of salt and candles. You are to accompany a minor retinue to a distant fair and prove useful by providing sound. Useful is the word, not welcome, not valued. Useful. You wrap your harp in oiled cloth and then in a coarse blanket, tie the bundle with hemp cord, and shoulder it as a carter shoulders sacks. The road greets you with a wet grin of ruts and puddles that are only puddles until your boot sinks and learns they are wells. The countryside is not peaceful. The hedgerows hide men with old knives and new hungers. The ditches hold a green water that smells of cattle and fever. You walk beside a mule cart whose axle complains like a tired priest. The air tastes of last year's smoke, even though spring is trying to convince the fields to be green again. You measure the day not by the sun, which hides behind traveling clouds, but by the ache that begins at your left shoulder and works down to your wrist, where the edge of the harp case presses a bruise into being. At night, the retinue stops at inns that are not inns so much as roofs over inconveniences. The common rooms are packed with bodies and their air, which is a mixture of wet wool, fried fat, and the human alphabet of unwashed complaints. You sleep near your instrument, one hand through the rope handle, because you have learned that an innkeeper's smile is a mask for arithmetic. A harp is worth many suppers to the right buyer. You do not begrudge them the thought. You simply stay awake longer than is wise. The first fair rises out of the mist like a city someone forgot to finish. Tents squat in rows. their ropes making tripwires across puddled lanes. The ground is churned to a paste of soil and straw. Traders shout about salted fish, dyed cloth, iron nails, charms against illness, charms to invite it, charms to confuse the one with the other. You find the patch of trampled grass the steward's man says will serve as your stage. There is no stage. There is only mud that receives your boots with enthusiasm. You stand anyway, unwrap the harp, and look up at a sky the color of pewter. Your first notes vanish into the market's jaw like crumbs. You play louder, and the sound returns to you cut into pieces by distance and distraction. You shift closer to the edge of a butcher's stall because meat draws crowds, and sometimes crowds, as a side effect, tolerate music. Your fingers stiffen in the wind. You rub them together, lay them back on the strings, and begin again. The butcher's boy watches you as he wipes a blade that could cut a day in half. A child stares with the blunt awe reserved for new animals. A dog sits, and that is perhaps your most attentive listener. Coins do come, though they come as if they have made a mistake. A woman with red, chapped hands places a small one on the rim of your cap without looking at you. A merchant flicks a larger one onto the ground as if feeding a bird, and you stoop to pick it out of the mud after he has gone, which is part of the public agreement between buyers and bearers of sound. Once, a drunk tries to put a coin directly into your mouth, and when you step back, he laughs and calls you delicate. You do not correct him. Delicate men eat when there is meat to eat. Rain arrives without the courtesy of warning. It strikes the harp case like thrown peas and then becomes a steady sheet, a curtain drawn by a petty prince. You scramble beneath a canvas awning that leaks in disciplined points. You loosen the strings so the wood will not split under swelling tension. You have learned to treat the instrument as a child with difficult lungs. The rain thickens the fair's music into a single drum beat. People crowd nearer to the awnings, breathing each other's breath and pretending they prefer it that way. You resume playing, soft, careful, building a little room of notes around your own head. The road after the fair is not kinder. A fever travels with you for a few days, a small tyrant that insists on its share of your attention. You keep moving because moving is the only protection you have ever had. There are robberies on these routes. You see the aftermath in a ditch one morning, a cart broken, a sack of wheat torn open like a burst lung, footprints pointing every direction except back. You feel a practical gratitude that your harp is a large, awkward thing, hard to run with and harder to sell without questions. You keep your head down and your pace up. The next town has guild rules that smell of old parchment and new greed. Street playing is allowed, the bailiff tells you, but only where you will obstruct the least, and only after a fee that eats a slice of your week. You pay, because arguing would cost you more than coin. You set up near a baker's stall where heat in the air tricks the nose into thinking of bread instead of sweat. People pause, a few stay. When a boy laughs at your shoes, you smile as if you are in on the joke. By afternoon, you have earned just enough to imagine stew and a corner by a fire that burns something better than damp sticks. There are other musicians, and they are not your enemies until the rain stops and the crowd thins. A fiddler with a crooked bow hisses through his teeth when you begin to draw listeners from his patch of cobbles. A piper in patched green threatens to report you for playing a tune he claims as his own, which is a claim like a net thrown over the ocean. A singer with a voice like a scraped plate tells you that her mother died last winter and that you owe her pity measured in coins. You give her what you can, which is not much, and she curses you with theatrical weariness that wins her an extra coin from a passing gentleman. You develop a market face. It is open enough to invite, closed enough to deflect insult. You learn to fan the air with your sound, to catch attention at the edge of a person's hearing and coax it closer. You change tempos when a brawl begins so that the rhythm of fists will not drown you. You lean into a melody when the church bell starts, threading your notes between its iron statements as if they were lanes in a crowded street. You accept that for every moment, someone listens with a stillness that feels like grace. There will be 50 moments when they use your music as a roof for their shouting. Evenings bring the rooms where musicians go to count the day. You find a bench, a wooden bowl, a stew that is more water than meat, but at least is hot. You count coins twice, slowly, as if the second counting might shame them into multiplying. You rub oil into the harp's wood as if that were a prayer that could be answered. You check each string for the small lies it tells when tired. You tie a new knot where one has slipped. You listen to the whispers around you about a sickness in a nearby village, about a new toll on the bridge, about a lord who will not pay what he owes because his son prefers dice to settling accounts. On one market morning, the wind comes hard from the east and snatches your sound away before it can land. You change your stance and press the harp against your chest so that the soundboard uses your ribs as a second wall. You play a tune built on stubbornness. A small crowd forms not because you are brilliant, but because you are obstinate. An old woman cries without tears and tells you the melody has the color of the dress she wore when she was promised to a man who had already promised himself to ale. You nod as if you planned that color. You give her the only seat you own, the small folding stool, and she touches your sleeve with a hand like dry leaves. There are rougher days. A brawl spills into your space and knocks your harp sideways. The case takes the worst of it, but one string sings an ugly half note and then dies. You are on your knees at once, not to pray, but to check the frame for cracks. You find none, only a scuff you will think about for a week. Later, in a yard behind the inn, you boil a replacement string in a dented pot and stretch it as carefully as a lie told to a man who can hang you. When it holds pitch, you feel a small victory, like stealing a loaf from a generous God. You discover the church is a gate you can pass if you bow low enough. On certain afternoons, a clerk allows you to play in the porch where the sound is cleaner and the air smells of stone and beeswax. You choose psalm colors instead of tavern ones. The faithful ignore you on purpose, which is its own form of listening. Sometimes a priest frowns and reminds you that vanity is a sin disguised as art. You agree without argument because agreement is cheaper than conversation. The porch gives you a handful of quiet coins and a chance to hear your own instrument without the market chewing on it. At another fair, you are engaged to accompany a juggler who calls himself by a name that belongs on a banner. His knives are duller than his smile, and both are dangerous. He wants bright, quick music to match the rise and fall of his hands. You provide it and watch the knives flash in time. When a blade slips and snips a sleeve from a noble's coat, you change the tune to something soft that pretends nothing has happened. The noble laughs because his friends watch him for cues. You are paid in a handful of copper and a slice of roasted bird that tastes like victory mixed with smoke. Days become indistinguishable, as days do when everyone requires all of your body and a portion of your soul. You learn the seasonal voices of the road, spring's wet argument, summer's dust that chalks the tongue, autumn's rot, winter's clenched fist. You become a weather instrument. Your knuckles predict rain, your back forecasts fog. Your harp tells you when the air will split wood if you do not loosen the pegs before sleep. You also learn the ledger of attention. A tune that earns a little in one town earns nothing in the next. A lament that halts a crowd on a cold evening is a nuisance on a warm morning. You keep a careful memory of what worked where, not because your art demands it, but because your stomach does. You remind yourself that you are not here to be admired. You are here to trade sound for survival, to sell a fragile luxury to people who need bread and decide to buy a moment of brightness instead. When at last the retinue turns its wagons homeward, your boots are cracked, your cloak smells of a dozen fires, and your instrument bears the small, honest scars of use. You have a few more coins than you started with, and a little less trust in the kindness of weather, men, and luck. You also have a deeper sense of the craft than any court could have taught you. You have tuned in wind and played in rain and smiled at the wrong jokes with the correct teeth. You have learned that the marketplace is a truer master than any steward because it does not bother to pretend it respects you. You walk back toward the castle through fields that have been briefly greened by rain. The road remembers your feet. The towers appear as a row of blunt fingers against a sky that will not decide if it is morning or evening. You feel no triumph. You feel only the simple relief of walls that make drafts predictable. You will return to the annex that smells of horses and smoke. You will sleep with your hand on the rope handle. You will present your coins to the steward, who will count them and not meet your eye. And then, because this is the world you were given, you will prepare for the final lesson that waits in all human crafts: how to hold your work when your body begins to drop it. If there is courage in that, it is not the kind that songs celebrate. It is the stubborn courage of continuing. You carry the harp in, and the door closes behind you with a sound you already know too well. Your hands give you the news before anyone else does. They wake you in the dawn chill with a stiff, needling ache that travels from the base of the thumb through the tendons like a rumor that refuses to die. The ache is not yet pain, not always, but it has begun to take measurements, to mark door frames and stair treads, to learn the terrain of your joints, the way a bailiff learns the roads to every debtor. You rub oil into your fingers and into the wood of the harp, the twin rites that once felt like devotion and now feel like bargaining. The oil darkens the scars on the soundboard. Your own scars have also darkened. You have become a pair with your instrument, two timbers seasoned by the same drafts. At court, the seasons turn, but not for you. A newer musician arrives with fresh shoulders and the easy vanity of youth, his fingers to hop like sparrows from string to string. He plays quickly because he believes quickness is proof. He smiles often because he thinks smiling is a bridge. The steward approves of him, which is to say, the steward allows him to exist within the tolerances of the household. You do not hate the boy, you only recognize him as a clock you can hear. When the master asks for a lively piece, the boy is summoned. When a noblewoman wishes a sweet lull for her restless child, the boy receives the nod. You are called for the old songs, the ones that carry dust even when played well, the ones that please guests who do not remember where they first heard them because they have heard them everywhere. You still work. You still tune in cold corridors while a draft saws at your ankles. You still bow slightly to men who would not bow to anyone without a title, which is to say, almost no one. You still tighten a temperamental string with the measured patience of a man hoping not to hear that one ugly ping that ends a day. But you also begin to forget in sudden slips that offend you more than they disturb your listeners. A cadence wanders astray. A melody loses a stair step and stumbles. Your left hand reaches for a pattern that your right hand has already abandoned. You recover, usually. You have spent a life learning how to fall without drawing notice. The steward notices anyway. He does not scold, he records. There is a winter of coughing. The cough belongs to everyone. It turns the great hall into a kennel of iron throats. People speak to you and then sit down because standing is now a labor. Servants carry pails without the easy gossip of other years. The cook covers pots and prays to be spared a kitchen of thin soups. The Lord grows peevish and then quiet. You play many evenings to a room of woolen shoulders, the notes skating over tired minds and landing nowhere. When the coughing recedes at last, the castle counts its missing. Some were names, some were the quiet labor of hands. You require no list to know what has been taken. The stairs creak differently under fewer feet. In the spring, the steward speaks to you in the corridor where the light is bad. He mentions a reduction in expenses, though the word he prefers is trimming, as if coins were hedges. He assures you that your years of service are valued, which means they will be remembered indoors and perhaps repeated over a cup when the evening has grown fat. He suggests that the village where you were born might welcome you again, that the air there would be good for your chest, that the court will, of course, retain your availability for festival days. You understand. It is a dismissal padded with words, a sack stuffed with straw to keep the breakables from clinking. You bow in the manner of a man who has been taught to bow too many times. You leave as you arrived, not through the grand arch, but through the door that does not need a trumpet. The annex where you slept has the smell of you ground into the rushes. You roll your mattress, fold your blanket, and carry away what no one else wants: a cracked cup, a needle, a bit of wax, the small tin of oil for the harp, a handful of polite promises that will not light a fire. The young musician shakes your hand with an expression he believes is respect. You bear him nothing. You bear the instrument that has made you possible and impossible in the same breath. The road home is the same road that led away, altered not by time, but by your sight. You do not walk as fast. You stop a little more often to put your palms on your knees and breathe the way a mendicant counts blessings. The hedgerows have learned new tangles. The ditches wear last summer's reeds like shabby wigs. The rivers remember winter and keep their cold close, as if hoarding for a summer that might forget them. You sleep in places that sell warmth by the cup and wake in darkness to check the harp with a tenderness you do not lavish on yourself. The village appears by degrees, a series of smells before it is a place: smoke that is not from noble fires, manure that always seems to be fresh, cress crushed underfoot near the stream, the wool smell that leaks from any door where people exist in number. The hut of your childhood is no longer your hut. This is normal. Houses own generations, not individuals. You rent a corner of a cousin's cottage who is not a cousin so much as a human arrangement. You pay in coin at first, and then in flour, and then in small services that take your hands and your pride in equal portions. You are no longer a court musician. You are the man with the harp. You begin to play in the village in the way that does not ask permission. In the evening, you sit by the hearth and unroll a thread of sound while other threads move through the room: a woman knitting, a man mending a strap, a child coughing in the rhythm that summons a bowl of something warm. You do not perform, you occupy a space with tones the way smoke occupies rafters. People listen without the performance of listening. They are too busy to pretend. Sometimes a man exhausted by fields lifts his head and hears a phrase that makes him remember a morning when he was not so tired. Sometimes an old woman hums beneath you, not harmony, but history. Sometimes the music finds no purchase at all and slides into the clay of the floor. You do not mind. You were not promised applause. You play for births and for the hours after births when everyone is too rattled to speak. You play for wakes because the dead attract sound as ponds attract flies. You play a slow, circling tune while a neighbor's coffin is lifted, and the notes seem to stumble on the threshold as if wood recognizes wood. You play for a wedding where the bride's father has no coin and only a shoulder of salted pork to offer. You accept a slice and eat standing up in the yard because weather is more honest than chairs. Your music is not a service purchased by lords. It is a custom folded into the fabric of the day, like a patch that covers a frayed spot and also draws attention to it. The harp ages with you. The soundboard has acquired a hairline line, not yet a crack, just a path where the grain has decided to remember every dry season all at once. The pegs come plunking. At the end of autumn, the strings sulk when the wind swings around to the north. You talk to the instrument now, not out of madness, but because conversation with wood is the only reliable discourse you have known. You tell it that you will ask no more quickness from it. You tell it that together you will pursue steadiness, which is the last luxury and the hardest to afford. Young ones in the village ask for lessons. Their eyes shine with the same foolish light that once lit yours. You teach them the first rules because the first rules are always the last rules in disguise. Sit well, breathe without bragging, listen to the space around the notes. Do not hurry unless you must flee. Keep your instrument fed with attention and protected from the weather no one else notices. They preen over small victories, fingers landing true for 6 notes in a row. You nod and do not tell them that one day those 6 notes will be the only ones that do not betray them. They will discover this without your help. There are days when your hands refuse the simplest pattern, and the refusal stings, not because you require grandeur, but because you asked for no more than a humble shape, and even that was denied. On those days, you rest the instrument in your lap and sit with its silence until the silence becomes a sort of companion. You find that you can hum, barely, a soft line no one else hears. You find that your pulse keeps time in a way it never used to, a slow drummer taking over when the hired man did not come. You find that the memories of court have lost their sharpness, their edges rubbed by years until they resemble any other room where food was eaten and talk was louder than kindness. Sometimes you are invited back to the castle for a holy day. The steward speaks to you as if you had never left, and as if you were not precisely the kind of man who leaves and returns because life is a tide. The walls are the same, their damp patience unchanged. The young musician is a little less young. He stands straighter than the truth. When you play, no one remarks upon it, which is either an insult or a mercy. You finish, eat a slice of meat at the edges of the kitchen heat, and leave before the new gossip has time to learn your name again. Years narrow the corridor. You wake earlier because sleep is no longer a reliable tool. You eat simpler food because your stomach has grown honest. You speak less because words drag their feet and make the floor dirty. You sit by the hearth with the harp and feel the room receive you the way soil receives weather. On certain evenings, the music comes with an ease you do not trust, as if it has remembered you out of charity. On others, you earn every tone with small coins of effort. It no longer matters. You are not the herald of anything. You are a man with a skill, a craft set down each day like a bowl placed carefully on a table that is not very steady. One winter night, a boy from the road knocks and asks to warm himself, and you say yes because refusing would cold your own bones. He stares at the harp as if at a creature he has heard about but never seen. He asks if it is hard. You think of mud, of courts, of knives that flew and did not quite fly, of coins counted twice, of coughs in long corridors, of births and wakes and wedding pork. You think of your old teacher, of his hands like stones and his eyes like wet candles. You think of all the mornings when music was simply the only thing that kept the hour from sagging. You say that it is a trade like any other. You say that it is a kind of carrying. You say that some loads teach you how to be their cart. When you can no longer manage the longer pieces, you keep the short ones polished until they show a plain reflection. You do not chase applause. On an afternoon when the snow holds its breath outside and the hearth mutters, you play a soft ribbon of sound that threads the room together, holding in one line a child's nap, a pot's simmer, and the thin memory of a summer river. No one thanks you. No one must. The work does not require witness, only willingness. In the end, there is less harp and more listening. You sit with the instrument across your knees like a sleeping dog and hear the house creak with the honesty of old timber. You hear the wind argue with the eaves and the chickens complain in their sleep, and the human heart continue with its odd courage. If you play, it is a few notes that make no claim, a small cup of sound offered to a world that has always been thirsty. You are not a master and were never a genius and will not be remembered in halls where names are sewn into tapestry. You are an example of what most lives are, a persistence made of small, repeated tasks, carried until they carry you. When the night is very quiet, you lay your palm flat on the soundboard and feel its faint answering hum, a breath within wood. You do not mistake it for greatness or for grace. You recognize it as company. The world has been heavy, and you have carried a portion of it in strings and wood, and it has carried you in return, not far, not high, only across. That is enough. In a century, everyone now alive will be gone, and the mud will still receive boots, and the wind will still go about its fool errands. Perhaps some other pair of hands will find the harp, mend its small line into a larger one, and ask of it what you asked, a way to make a little room within the cold, the hunger, the work. If so, you will have done your part. If not, the silence will not complain. You bank the fire, you wrap the harp, you lie down with the aches that have adopted you. In the dark, between the crackle of coals and the winter breathing at the door, you hear a last low chord that may exist only in your ribs. It is not a flourish. It is not an ending. It is the plain note that every craft earns when it is finally allowed to rest.